Bam has Bam has literally no ability to like host a. Let me rephrase this right. He has like the way.
Whoa.
You know, I want to tease that, and then we'll start the show, and then we'll just see how Bam reacts, which will prove my point.
Okay. Skip on the Palestine protest for this.
No, the thing I was gonna say, real talk, was that like there's a thing you can do, Bam, when like shit happens during the show, where you just like kind of ignore it and continue letting the show happen, and that makes it much better.
No, not this show.
Of course, right?
Not this month.
This is a sweep it under the rug kind of show.
Okay. You know
what? Well, no, go ahead. We're live.
No, I'd rather start the show.
Okay. See, Bam's got a lawyer. All right. So, moving. Okay.
Dershowitz.
Hello humans, this is episode 27 of your Power Report. I am here with Dan on a Power Report panel episode with Bam, Caesar, and Sean, my co-hosts here. And this week it's, you know, some places have Infrastructure Week. We have Israel Week because this has been a week of a lot of news relating to that region of the world. And everyone always approaches the Israel-Palestine situation. I mean, a lot of ways, there's even ways you approach it in words that can be complicated, but everyone approaches the situation itself as though it's complex. When I think now more than ever is an opportunity to be able to recontextualize the complexity of it and get rid of it and really just like make it much more simple, because it is a real simple situation of oppressor versus the oppressed in that sense. But there are certain details as to what's happening right now that I think will be really excellent to get into. Are we ready? Are we looking around for something? Are we watching over our shoulders to make sure there's no,
Don't do it, Dan. Don't do it, Dan. Don't do it.
I know how Bam knows me this well. He knows the joke I'm about to make. Let's go. Let's instead go in and just be safe about this. So, yeah, there were the difficult thing when you're explaining a story that involves Israel and Palestine is because regardless of where you start, you're kind of starting in the wrong place unless you want to do like a 10-hour podcast. So let's start with basically people would understand and approach the news by seeing a lot of news headlines that are saying Israel launches rockets into Hamas as far as a response to this conflict. The Israel-Palestine conflict raises in tension or like escalates as there are casualties on both sides and both sides exchange rocket fire during the night. But I think one of the first things that's really important to do, in this case especially, is to heavily, like very, very much contextualize everything happening here as though it's like a reset, like we start over here. So first of all, in order to understand, like, you have to understand the way the media sort of reads and talks about these things, because that in itself is full of a lot of different tropes that I think were really well pointed out in this opinion article that was in TRT World by Dinjal Legic, that says, rather than providing historical and political context in a criticism of mainstream media, some dominant media resort to recycling of familiar tropes. The recent events were referred to as a, quote, clash, or a tension, or a night of chaos, or bouts. An abundance of headlines has announced that clashes between Palestinians and Israeli police. Western media outlets obscure the Israeli origins of violence while implying a false parity of power within the Palestinians. In reality, one side is a nuclear-armed, heavily militarized apartheid regime that has legal, political, and military control over the other side, which is struggling for basic rights and sometimes mere survival. I think that's a good place for us to start. And we've also done episodes in previous Power Report. We've done segments in previous Power Reports where we've discussed vaccine apartheid that is going on in Israel, where Israel was leading the world in its rollout of COVID-19 vaccines to its people, as long as you count its people as in the Israeli territories, because the Palestinian occupied territories, Gaza, the West Bank, etc., rates of getting those COVID vaccines out were abysmal. And so I'm going to come back to that little piece of things, because we've been talking about that for a long time on Power Report in the more broader context of COVID-19. But I think that context will help like paint a picture if we like put a pin in that for now. But Bam, I know because this is like stuff you are interested in as far as like this area of the world. What were some of your thoughts as like things were happening this week, especially as we're laying kind of the groundwork as to what happened? Because this is the month of Ramadan. There's like, or Ramadan just ended, mind you. There's like a Jerusalem Day that happened where like is usually also a celebration of like the city of Jerusalem and who it should quote unquote rightfully belong to. So there were tensions that were rising as well. But anything you want to go into that, I'd love for you to.
Well, that Jerusalem Day is just a day where settlers just go harass Arab residents and chant death to Arabs and things like that. It's some fake holiday that they made up just to be violent. This kind of goes back to, I'm not going to get into a whole bunch of history, but the Israeli policy of quote unquote mowing the lawn, which they prominently say, openly say, Benny Gantz, their defense minister, says that they periodically, I mean, it seems like they periodically want to show the people in the occupied territories, the Palestinians occupied territories, who's boss. But this situation is a little bit different because we have the Arab residents of Israel rising up also. You know, when it first kind of started jumping off a bit over there, because I pay attention to the region a lot, I was kind of like, well, this is stuff happens all the time. Like they always are violating people in Al-Aqsa Mosque, and there's always these things going on. I was kind of like, well, what's different now? But it has gotten a bit more tense as of late. A lot more Palestinians have been killed by Israel. I haven't really been checking the numbers like that. I haven't really been watching too many videos for my own mental health, but I don't know how many Israelis have died in this current conflict.
At the time we're recording, at least this is this morning on Saturday, the 15th of May, I think the number was around 11 Israelis were dead, but the number's around 80 Palestinians.
Okay, it's probably more. It's interesting
so far,
because
yeah, these are developing situations.
When you're talking about the media, it is crazy because the context of the situation is that Israel is a settler colonial power. The Palestinians there are the indigenous people of that land. Nobody could imagine looking back in like the 1600s and seeing the Native Americans here, the indigenous people on this land, and like Europeans coming and colonizing them and killing them and committing a genocide and siding with the Europeans. It makes no sense. But that's what happens with this conflict in Israel. Hamas has very little firepower. They have defensive methods that they can sometimes use offensively. Israel, as the colonial power, they don't want anything less than the total capitulation of the people that they've occupied. They look at any resistance as a means to like justify killing, bombing whole blocks. There's so many instances I remember. I'm just like, this is crazy. You trying to target one person and using bombs that take out like blocks of apartments, and there's no way to rein them in. I'm going to get into that later when we talk. I'm sure we're going to talk about like the ways that these like Israel can be reined in a bit, but the context is a settler colonial power that is doing a systematic genocide of the people that they've occupied.
Yeah, I think even when you dig into more of the context of this situation on its own, I think the first time I saw about this was there was a video of a woman who was like noticing an Israeli like settler like squatting in her house. And this woman's like, what are you doing while you're in my house? Get out of here. And the Israeli settler is just like not budging. It's just like, this is my property. I live here essentially. And if I wasn't trying to settle this properly and steal this properly, essentially, someone else would be doing it.
Jacob, you know this is not your house.
Yes, but if I go, you don't go back. So what's the problem? What are you yelling at me? I didn't do this. I didn't do this.
But
It's easy to yell at me, but I didn't do this.
you are stealing my house.
And if I don't steal it, someone else is going to steal it.
No one is allowed to steal it, يا عمي.
זה לא שלי להחזיר.
And so there's protests that were happening around that. And the reason I think it's helpful to contextualize it that way is because then you see some nights of Palestinians like getting upset. There get demonstrations because like this is their land that's been shrunken down over the past 50, 60 years or so to what's little that's left, and it's already being taken away from them, right? So they were having these protests as this was happening. And of course, as was happening just in the 21st century a lot, these protests end up being clashes with police. The protesters have rocks, the police are heavily militarized, and then violence ensues. And kind of like Bam was describing right there, then that sort of leads to heightened tension because the same type of person, the extremist, like Israeli settler who is trying to squat in that woman's house there, they represent the hard right in Israel that is being heavily influenced by the party that Benjamin Netanyahu, the current prime minister, is in charge of. But it's also a party that Benjamin Netanyahu doesn't have a lot of control over. I consider this to low like the right wing in Israel is almost like they're moving towards like making Israel like just a state. They want it to be just a Jewish state. And that comes with ethnic cleansing, essentially. And so they're trying to say that they're creating legal frameworks for this ethnic cleansing. Like, oh, we actually put a law or we warned them to move away from this area and we're going to move it anyways. But who's to say that they're the people who are like moving out of this area? So like, it's just a whole ridiculous thing.
Well, Sean, before you go, let me just say this really, really fast. The hard right in Israel is the whole Israel. There's no left, there's no center. The hard right.
Again, are we talking about the people who are there, or are we talking about the politicians? Because I would disagree with saying like the whole of Israel are like far right. Like
there's no one that has any modicum of power that is not hard right. The left, what exists of the left and the quote unquote center has no power in Israel. And also the thing that's crazy, like, somebody wouldn't even believe that there is a person coming to steal this woman's house. Like, it's unbelievable to someone. Like, you can't, like, yeah, this person came to like squat at this person's house. They didn't ask nothing. They just showed up and like they're allowed to do that. It sounds unbelievable, but these things happen. Also, these clashes that happen, somebody kind of playing devil's advocate, like, yeah, well, what do you expect when you throw rocks at the police and things like that? Israel is one of the most like protesting populations ever. They're always having protests. The settlers like hate the state so much. They go crazy on the Israeli police. They throw rocks, they throw bricks, they steal their shields, be beating them with their own batons. The Israeli police won't fire one shot at Israeli citizens. They will not fire one shot. But as soon as Palestinians do anything to fight for their rights, it's tear gas, it's live fire, it's everything. Oh, it's quote unquote steel, plastic covered bullets. But trust me, if you know what happens in Israel, they protest every single day, and not one shot fired.
See a lot of parallels there.
The apartheid state exists, and it is very blatant.
I think right now too, you're seeing more bombings and stuff from Israel from Netanyahu trying to gain more political control because they've had 5 elections since 2019, and he hasn't been able to actually get a government, a coalition together. He doesn't have enough political control and everything. So I think this is one of the ways to try and rile up the people to get into vote for him, because he's really afraid of losing power. Because I think the election's next month or something. It's pretty close for Israel for their newest elections coming up. So I see all of that tension, all of the stuff going on as part of a ruse to try and gain more political capital for Netanyahu as he's scared to get out of power. I mean, obviously, we don't want to go into the entire history of it because this would be an 18-hour podcast. But some of the stuff that started where they banned Muslims going bigger than a 10,000 people crowd to one of the most holy sites in Islam. And that's kind of what started off the ball rolling. And I think that policy was to try and gain some political capital. We also have that with Hamas as well, but that's a whole different story too. So I think that's something insight that gets overlooked a little bit as well, because Netanyahu has done a lot of different insane atrocities. He's also one of the most corrupt politicians in the entire world, and is been proven in a court multiple times on it as well. So I think that's something that needs to be said a bit more, especially mainstream media. No one ever calls him out that much. It's insane. Biden goes up to him and is like, oh, I talked to Netanyahu. Never talked to any Palestinians, but I talked to Netanyahu. Like, how the hell are you going to talk to him and believe a word he says when in 2014 he bombed Gaza and killed 95 or 80% civilians, something absurd like that, and you're going to let him go away and not talk to another side for it? So it's a lot of bullshit that goes on in there, and no one really talks about it too much. And if you do, then you're hushed from society. So
bars.
There's a phrase I always think about when I think about this conflict, and those in power. Those who are in power also have the power of restraint. I think it's really easy for people to take the side of, oh, well, they threw the rock and rock first. We know the size of the Israeli military. We know what they're capable of doing. I mean, just for example, this morning, they bombed an entire building that had a lot of Al Jazeera media. Children died. It's near a refugee camp. The justification for initiating through whatever initiation they claim that the Palestinians did to start this off, when we have clear video counterwise and we see the back and forth all the time. This is the answer you feel is appropriate. We talk so much about democracy and how democracy is so important in this country, but when it comes to the Israeli conflict, people just look away, or they go, oh, well, the Palestinians sparked it. Yeah, but how was a refugee camp with children justification? How was 31 dead Palestinian children justification for those actions? How was it bombing an entire business building? How was that the answer? How was that correct to you when it comes to solving the issue? It's not right. We know how powerful Israel is. We know what he's capable of doing. The videos of Al-Aqsa, and like Bam said, that's not the first time that's happened there. It's not the first time Palestinian people have been, almost harassed by the situation. And I don't know. It's hard to see resolve, but and hard to see. What's the proper plan and what's in motion to help them out, but. And it can only happen if the Israel, which is a massively powerful country, tons of military power and money, they wield the ability to restrain and adjust. It's not, you can't ask the Palestinian people to do that. They're the impoverished. They're the ones that were the original people there. Their land has been being stripped from them. How can you ask them to stop? They're literally getting their land robbed from them. That makes no sense to me. If someone was coming to America and they were taking like Florida, which would give up, or like New York or whatever, what would we do? We're going, oh, well, we got to dial it back. We don't want to, start something. No, there'd be action towards it. So it's really funny how people want to play this game and not put themselves in the other shoes, the shoes of the Palestinian people, while the situation is going on.
Yeah, I think you're getting to a really good thing there, Caesar. But like the way the Palestinian the way the Israeli government tries to kind of play this both sides game with how the treatment of Palestinians is going, because they try to say that no, we are putting it and making sure that Palestinians are being treated in the best ways possible. They have all these supplies. They have freedom to go wherever they want to, even though that's very clearly not true and obvious. We've seen all these things always shout out to Abby Martin and Mike Preisner for all of their work they've done recovering Israel and Gaza and all the tensions there, where you'll have a kid who will point his finger literally across the border where these Israeli soldiers are, and the Israeli IDF forces will have a sniper rifle aimed at his head with a red dot and everything. It's just that shows the imbalance of power there. But they're also trying to say that no, in this territory that we won't admit as a state, but still we give total sovereignty and has total power and everything, we're treating them totally correctly. What's the thing that I put the pin in the beginning is the vaccine like apartheid issue, where Israelis, people in the Israeli territories, they had no problems getting the vaccine. People in the Palestinian territories, the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, vaccine rollout was like 2, 3, 4%. It's still like very, very minimal there. They're still having an issue there. It goes to say that this is a very clear and obvious second-class system here. And you can tell when you have a second-class system when every time Israel is caught doing something egregious, like Caesar, you just mentioned, they bombed offices that you have Al Jazeera and other foreign media in, saying, oh, well, it's because Hamas is hiding all of their weaponry inside all these buildings. So what else are we going to do? That's their fault for putting the weapons there, even though that's very much like not the case. And like Hamas is a separate thing there, but it's all meant to distract from the fact that, oh, it's almost like we're in an abusive relationship. They made us do this. We have to respond and do this. How else would we, what do you expect us to do? Hamas, which is also to be said and mentioned, they have a different power dynamic where they have to also appear and make sure they look strong against these Israeli attacks, or else they lose a lot of legitimacy for power. And like they're constantly trying to battle that as well, because Hamas's strategies against Israel so far have not necessarily worked. And I think they're losing some public support in that sense. But like they will fire however many rockets. The Iron Dome technologies that have been provided thanks to you and I and all of our United States tax dollars to Israel get down most of them. And so the casualties that can possibly be incurred on the Israeli side are minuscule compared to what the way you're going against the Palestinians. It's just like completely asymmetric warfare. And that is the way this always has to be described, as asymmetric warfare.
You have other... Oh, I'll say it was going to the power dynamic, or the thing you were talking about with Hamas, Dan. That was another thing I wanted to bring up, because how I said earlier about Netanyahu worried about losing power. Hamas doesn't, as to my knowledge, controls Gaza, but does not control the West Bank. Either trying, like they want to control the West Bank, but the Faya, who control the West Bank? Don't know how to pronounce it, but they're. But there you go.
The Palestinian Authority.
Yeah, Palestinian Authority. So there's two different rival factions, and they actually had like different conflicts and stuff between each other throughout history as well. But right now they're trying to hold like some election at an undisclosed time this year. And I think that's another thing of Hamas is trying to show power at the same time that Israel is trying to show power to gain political control. So that's a whole nother dynamic that's going on. That's like brewing a giant storm as well. That also needs to be said too, because Hamas wants to gain control of all of Palestine, not just of Gaza. So that's another thing. But yeah, they don't have the amount of technology and resources they have is minuscule compared to Israel. It's insane. They just don't have the weaponry.
Yeah.
Go
ahead, Bam. Go ahead.
I think Hamas, like their strategy in regards to fighting, they want to get Israeli troops in Gaza. They want to get those boots on the ground because that's where they do damage. And in 2014, when those troops got on the ground in Gaza, like they were getting rocked. Mm-hmm. So when it comes down to the fighting, like, I mean, when Israel starts bombarding, Hamas send rockets back, and their rockets have gotten better ever since they got back with Iran and Syria and stopped playing those games with Qatar and Egypt. Anyway, they have better technology, and whenever Israel starts bombarding, their goal is to send those rockets and hope Israeli troops come on the ground so they can do damage. Israel has the license to kill infinite amount of civilians. They can do whatever they want. Hamas rockets are not going to kill that many. They're not going to do any real retaliation against Israel's public. What they want to do is get those troops back in body bags. That might be the only thing for the Israeli public to maybe in 40 years want to be like, okay, let's try to figure something out, because we don't want to be having our kids coming back in body bags.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, Israel is a very militarized society. Everybody joins the military at a certain age, and they have to do like 2 years, along with Brazil. The situation as it is like Hamas is small, but they have a lot. They have good training, and they have a lot of morale. Whereas the Israeli soldiers, like they're not really trying to do all that. They're not trying to really go on the ground. So, and as far as Sean, what you're talking about the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, like politically, the situation politically in an occupied territory is just minimal. Mahmoud Abbas is still alive. He's giving speeches and stuff. Nobody really takes him serious. The Palestinian Authority you don't really have much authority when you're occupied by these people that hate you. You know, like you're really just operating on what they'll let you do. And obviously Gaza has been like, had embargoes for years. They're not able to get concrete. All these different things is really difficult for them. I don't know if the border with Egypt is still closed. There's been times it's been closed. I've seen videos of Egyptian soldiers shooting at women and children at that border gate, like grandmothers, like shooting them. Get out of here. It's really such a terrible situation. It's constant. And I'm not going to get into how it could possibly stop, but I do have some stuff here. But y'all are letting me ramble, so this is your fault.
And I was just Bam was rambling, took me off topic. But I think that one of the more damning statements is when the defense minister of Israel basically said that Gaza will burn. Like when you say something like that, like that's telling to you what Bam said. There's an infinite number of Palestinian citizens that they have no issue just murdering and killing, and that strategy is well. Before I get to that, like the Hamas thing to me is like, it's like if we're gonna have a discussion about everything that's going on, that's not a focal point for me really, because in the back and forth, Hamas is like throwing a punch and they have like guns. Like it's a whole different situation. That's why I talk about you have the power to restrain. Like you can be so much stronger than somebody and it's up to you to stop this. So if you want to keep pounding that person to the ground, you know what you're capable of. So that's more indicative on you as a person or you as a country when you're able to just keep pounding on people that are just going to fight to the end and like that you have more to wield in them. So that's different. So in Hamas, like Bam said, that's a classic strategy that you've seen very much in history where, yeah, it's all good. You have space, you have all this, but let those soldiers come into the close quarters of the city, get in there. That's where all that doesn't matter because they're not going to bomb their own troops. They're not going to do all that. So they want boots to the ground because they're going to limit air raids and they get to get one-on-one in close situations. That's happened in Brazil with the favelas and the army came in. There's been different situations in history where this is a very, very used tactic. So that's just Hamas's approach in terms of wanting to wield that power back, showing the people that what they're capable of doing, how they can still protect them against the Israeli. That's all not leading us to somewhere where we need to be. We need to stop. We need to stop before we get to points like that. That's going to make things more difficult. But go ahead, man.
Benny Gantz, defense minister of Israel, the so-called centrist leader of the Blue and White Party. This is the guy that they try to say is like he's not as extreme as Netanyahu. He is a war criminal, and yeah, he said Gaza will burn. Before he said, "Remember what I did in 2014? It's gonna be worse." He's saying, yeah, if you guys try to fight back like you did in 2014, it's gonna be worse. Yeah. That's Benny Gantz. This is the so-called centrist who was trying to. They tried to make some coalition in Israel to obviously the politics are insane and there's all these elections. The Blue and White Party was attempting to make a coalition with some Arab Israeli parties, some of those Arab parties, completely rejected. People getting accosted, the Arabs getting accosted in the Knesset, where their Congress or whatever is. It's one of the most egregiously racist, just terrible political systems in the world. If you really if you go listen to what these politicians talk about, they are proud of killing Palestinians. They fight for like, no, look, you remember what I did when I killed all those Palestinians? Oh no, I'm gonna do more. Like Netanyahu, Benny Gantz go back and forth. Like
being racist towards them is like actually gets them political pull and gets them more votes. People want that in their leadership there. So when I hear like the whole like, oh, centrist, blah blah blah, I'm like, no. When you've already aligned on that side, there's no other side to it. There's no other. You're over there, buddy. To me, like for real.
There's no moderation. There's no sense of like, okay, this person's not going to be like, no, you better get on that TV and talk about how you're going to kill people in Gaza. Because that's the only way people are going to vote for you in Israel.
And lastly, like the quote, I have it right here, was, I mean, just listen to this quote for yourself. Benny Gantz said, they're sacrificing you for their personal interests. If citizens of Israel have to sleep in shelters, then Gaza will burn. There is no other equation. If they have to sleep in shelters, I'm gonna burn that whole region of people. That's
dehumanizing to say the least.
Speaks for itself.
Yeah, and they will do it.
Yeah, but it makes sense for like Bam's point earlier. I wanted to kind of get back to what Israel wants to do with Gaza and stuff. That there's a whole thing of they're trying to gain more control, gain more settlements and stuff. And there's a couple different resolutions. And the one that they are afraid of doing is a ground war, because they know if they go in, like what happened earlier, they're going to get rocked because of Gaza is very, very densely populated. For those who don't know, it's almost like it's insanely impoverished area. They barely get water, like food, because all of that, their biggest import is from Israel, so they control all of their, or most of their imports. So, but when throughout history, when Israel has gone in there, they don't know the lay of the land. Hamas knows the lay of the land. It's kind of similar to how when the USSR invaded Afghanistan and how poorly that went, or when the US invaded Vietnam and they don't know the lay of the land. It's kind of a similar situation to that, where it would become like a war of attrition, which is the worst kind of thing that can happen in the world, honestly. And within that, that's another thing that Hamas is trying to promote, to try and get in there to come to some type of resolution. Because Hamas wants to go to the talking table and say, hey, I want to talk and find a resolution. Israel's basically saying, no, fuck you. And we don't want to talk, which is insane. When the country with the most amount of power doesn't have a two-state solution, doesn't have anything other than their grand ambitions of basically colonizing the entire region. But Hamas is like, we want to have some type of two-state solution so that way we can recover. And obviously they have their own ideas, own things to go with the different powers in the region to go more with Iran, with Syria and all of that. But that's a whole different subject. It's just really sad to see one side really be like, hey, we want to talk, we want to go up to the talking table. Other side going, nope, that's not on the table. We'll burn you before that happens. It's crazy.
I think that's a perfect opportunity to move on to the next part of this, which is the fact that we know how we kind of have a sense of what's going on with the Israel-Palestine situation to some extent, and we know a very, very passing understanding of at least where the complexities come about within the internal politics in the region. But externally, of course, you can't really get to this, even like outside the idea of drawing historical parallels. You can't really get to the middle of this story without touching on the fact that this sits on the world stage. There's a lot of global influence, like never mind the whole fact that Israel is a political creation coming out of World War II and all of the justifications and complications with doing that and putting it where it is, and Britain doing good old colonialism. As we bring it to today, actually, before we go all the way to today, I am going to throw into the podcast a video that I think is really crucial of Joe Biden, who is now currently the president of the United States, but back in 1986 was just a senator. And he was kind of speaking to the main existence of why there is an Israel and why America cares about it so much.
If we look at the Middle East, I think it's about time we stop, those of us who support, as most of us do, Israel in this body, for apologizing for our support for Israel. There's no apology to be made. None. It is the best $3 billion investment we make. Were there not an Israel, the United States of America would have to invent an Israel to protect her interest in the region. The United States would have to go out and invent an Israel.
And in that clip, he is really adamant that if Israel did not exist, America would create an Israel essentially as a proxy in the Middle East. And that has kind of been, that's kind of been the idea behind why the United States gets so involved in the region, involved in the Middle East. Of course, it's wrapped in a lot of religious things, like we want to make sure the Jewish people have a state, and we want to make sure, like all these other different things that evangelical parts of America have also gotten into. There's some like doomsday revelation scenarios that also digs into as well. But America has been supporting Israel with that view that it is a proxy in the region and helps provide stabilization alongside Saudi Arabia, because that can be iffy, against Iran, because Iran and Israel stand as enemies pretty clearly. It provides them a lot of buffer and ability for America to, if it needs to, build on its already large colonial empire. And so coming into this understanding where America sits in this, you usually would expect, and you have, I would say this not just expect, this has been across the board history for like my entire life and a lot of other people's lives as well, unequivocal, unflinching support for the Israeli state and the Israeli government, so much so there is no really difference between the two, like the Israeli state as an idea versus the political government as right-wing and as extreme as it is. There's always unequivocal support from both sides of the aisle on Israel in the United States. However, it has seemed that this time there's something a little bit different. And like as we're getting into it, I wanted to kind of talk about what y'all kind of saw that may have been or felt a little bit different about this kind of round of the what was described by Alex Ward and Vox as the Israel-Palestine doom loop, right?
Dan, you mentioned 1986. You went back, not me. So I feel like I must address a minor topic. If I get too long, just mute me.
Go in.
This is the episode for it, so go in.
Okay, but you mentioned 1986.
I take responsibility. Go in.
Okay. So Biden said that if there wasn't an Israel, that America would have created it. It's something to that effect, yes?
Correct.
Absolutely the case. But America has a quote unquote an Israel in that region. Saudi Arabia is a major ally of the United States, even more important than Israel, in my opinion. But if you remember, in 1973, Saudi Arabia cut off that oil, and it really affected the United States to the extent that the United States,
surges.
Yeah, worse than now with the gas and the plastic bags. To the extent that the United States and obviously we all know that the United States foreign policy doesn't matter, Democrat, Republican. These are like the
imperialist, this is empire politics. Yeah,
exactly. When that happened, America as an entity realized, okay, we're allied with these people, but they have a lot of control. They have a lot of power over us. Israel as a state can do nothing to the United States, but at the same time can serve the United States' interests in the region. But I don't really think the United States actually has that much loyalty to Israel as an entity, really. That's just my opinion. But the major difference between Israel and Saudi Arabia is that Saudi Arabia does have something that the United States relies on, whereas Israel does not. Both of them serve the United States interests in the region 100%, but there is a big difference there. I just want to say that before Sean or Caesar get into what you actually asked about.
Fair enough. Yes. That's a good point to add. I'll just reiterate that what I was kind of getting towards to ask about for anyone else who wants to comment on it is the differences between like right now, and the U.S. kind of response and reaction, especially given what Bam said, the historical context of it. Right now, the U.S. response and reaction with the politicians, at least, and the public to some extent, of what's been going on compared to the past.
You have a couple congresswomen. You have Bam's baby mama Rashida Tlaib, and
Bam,
and
you've
Ilhan
used up
Omar
all of your allotted
basically-
time, so we're just gonna have to let Sean continue now.
Anyways, you have them actually going out and speaking against the atrocities of Israel, which doesn't happen that often in U.S. politics.
To read the statements from President Biden, Secretary Blinken, General Austin, and leaders of both parties, you'd hardly know Palestinians existed at all. There has been no recognition of the attack on Palestinian families being ripped from their homes in East Jerusalem right now, or home demolitions. No mention of children being detained or murdered. No recognition of a sustained campaign of harassment and terror by Israeli police against worshipers, kneeling down and praying and celebrating their holiest days in one of their holiest places. No mention of Al-Aqsa being surrounded by violence, tear gas, smoke, while people pray. Can my colleagues imagine if it was their place of worship filled with tear gas? Could you pray as stun grenades were tossed into your holiest place? Above all, there has been absolutely no recognition of Palestinian humanity. If our own State Department can't even bring itself to acknowledge the killing of Palestinian children is wrong, well, I will say it for the millions of Americans who stand with me against the killing of innocent children, no matter their ethnicity or faith. I weep for all the lives lost under the unbearable status quo, every single one, no matter their faith, their background. We all deserve freedom, liberty, peace, and justice, and it should never be denied because of our faith or ethnic background. No child, Palestinian or Israeli, whoever they are, should ever have to worry that death will rain from the sky. How many of my colleagues are willing to say the same, to stand for Palestinian human rights as they do for Israelis?
You have a couple other politicians and stuff kind of saying the same things, or like a little milquetoast versions of. You have like a Bernie saying like a milquetoast version of that, saying that if Israel can defend itself, then you have to talk about how can Palestine defend itself as well. So stuff in different resolutions of including Palestine as well, and not just Israel, which is nice to hear. You have Andrew Yane's cuck take of basically the normal politics of America, saying, oh, they have a whole thing. Look at all these things happening against Israel, and then realizing that he's in the super wrong because he's a tech bro and doesn't know what he's talking about, and then tries to apologize for it because he realizes that's the cool thing to do to try and gain more support in his New York race. But that's blowing up in his face. But the things are, it feels like to me it's now becoming more of a I say normalized, but it's becoming more normalized of a talking point to see the other view of it, not just one side constantly in the mainstream media and everything. You have different people, different journalists and stuff going on to mainstream outlets at CNN, MSNBC, and so on, talking about like what's going on the ground, kind of the history of the region and all of that, what is really going on. And that's nice to hear, and that's nice to see, instead of just like all the propaganda and all the other stuff you get throughout American media and U.S. politicians and stuff who have vested interests in the region, lots of money, other stuff, political ideas, religious ideas, all these stuff that have been like going on for 40, 50 plus years in this country. So that's one thing I've got a sense of, and especially more of younger people and other stuff online, getting more of a sense, getting exposed to real atrocities and other stuff in the region, and more people getting more information on the entire region as a whole. So more people are able to talk about the situation and are now getting educated. It's not like us where we've known about it for a long time. Like Bam and I have had discussions on this a while ago and stuff. And it's now it's more in people's rhetoric to talk about it, which is good. That's my big differences that I've seen.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to say. It's kind of hard really to gauge from where we're sitting here to understand how culture has shifted, how Generation Z is different from previous generations, and in terms of young Israeli and Palestinians. Like, it's hard to gauge that. You know, I mean, Biden is now the president, and you're talking about statements he was making years ago, correct? And you know, during his, there was the interview we all saw with, was it his press secretary? I don't know who that guy was exactly, who they were asking about Israeli response to the Palestinians, and he gave a very typical mid answer, you know, just saying that, well, yeah, people have the right to fight for their freedom, but then also said that he wasn't talking about Israel-Palestine. He was kind of doing a lot of dodging. And
yeah, it was someone I believe who worked in Biden's State Department, just to be clear. And it was like really good journalist questions were basically asking.
Oh, those journalists were going hard.
And I want to ask you, I don't want to harp on this either, but you know, the Israelis killed 13 people just now, you know, including maybe 5 or 6 children. Do you condemn that? Do you condemn the killing of children?
Saeed,
I'm asking, do you condemn the killing of Palestinian children?
Obviously, and these reports are just emerging, and I understand, I was just speaking to the team, I understand we don't have independent confirmation of facts on the ground yet, so I'm very hesitant to get into reports that are just emerging. Obviously, the deaths of civilians, be they Israeli or Palestinians, are something we would take very seriously.
Okay.
You're going to know as soon as I read what your answer was that there's a big problem with it. You said, well, not a problem, it just doesn't answer the question. We believe that it, meaning the right to self-defense, applies to any state. Well, you see the problem, right? Yes?
Do you
regard Palestine as a state?
I wasn't referring.
Do you don't in the context of the ICC and the UN. So are you saying that you do not, if it applies to any state, are you saying that Palestinians don't have a right to self-defense?
I was making a broader point, not attached to Israel or the Palestinians in that case.
So they do have a right to self-defense.
Matt, I'm not in a position to debate the legalities from up here. What our message is one of de-escalation.
All right.
Yeah, like you don't see that kind of journalism made anymore. No, like that is a.
He was in the wrong room. He's like, wait, this is a trap? Like,
yeah, they had to bomb some buildings for that one. That was way too much sauce. They had to teach him a lesson after that. But like,
all of us immediately start Googling where do these guys work at?
Right.
Anyways, so they were going hard. But no, like, it's hard. You know, what's our metric? What's our metric for reading what response is? Because you know, we are seeing at the same time a lot of people taking what otherwise we see as leftists and progressives having a different opinion on this issue over there, having a different viewpoint. When it's funny to me that we're in a country that, you know, has spent the last 3 years or so transitioning to a different style of government after the Trump administration to now to Biden, and we're seeing all these laws and things being passed and the changes. Something sparks up in Israel, and now we're seeing, you know, people, at least that I follow, kind of having a very different answer than I would expect, you know, especially in their support of how things are here. So it's hard to gauge to see, but I am happy that there is more resources available for us to see more responses to it. Now, I don't know with algorithms how things are working out in terms of what we're seeing in response to it and what we're actually getting to look at, but it's nice to see that there's more options and more places that we get to see, you know, what's really going on in a region and how the response is to it.
To narrow your focus, Caesar, because I think those are good points, especially on like a public sense, because we want to try to like delineate what's like politics is like the public versus politics is what regular people are like politics versus the public and what regular people are thinking versus politics and what are the political actors who are elected doing, right? In the context of like the political actors, I think right now you're seeing like, I mean, you mentioned, or was mentioned earlier, Rashida Tlaib's like really powerful, like she really like cried speaking as a Palestinian woman, and through those sort of experiences, it was very strong. It's the sort of thing that you wouldn't necessarily see beforehand. Not to tease a little bit of the fun we'll have later in the show, but Glenn Greenwald was tweeting about how you wouldn't find all of the favorite like politicians of the left actually speaking out about this like horrid act of military intervention, and all of those Congress people that he was subtweeting, the AOCs, the Jamal Bowmans, the Ilhan Omars, the Squad people who like we can quibble with on different things on another day, specifically Ilhan Omar. I think she's a little bit like moderate liberal for me. But on these issues of American like foreign policy as it involves to like funding these governments that end up causing this damage in places that I mean, in ways that Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib have like personal lived experience with. They spoke out very forcefully with it. And I think usually like you have the Democratic Party, for example, who they have their influences, and many of the people within the party will kind of come out and speak sort of in that way. I'd say Andrew Yang kind of gave the old school standard Democratic Party approach to that answer. And when I was on the Damage Report with John Idarola earlier this week, I had a specific kind of take for that, considering my experience covering Andrew Yang, perhaps longer than anyone else in media. I'm not really cocky about a lot of things, but I'll state that for a fact because I interviewed Andrew Yang on TYT, or I had him on one of our shows 2 days after, or like a week after the 2018 midterms ended. So like at the earliest possible time the 2020 election started, I was following Andrew Yang. And so I knew that this like lunatic is just like not good at foreign policy. And he has no real intellectual curiosity around foreign policy. I don't think Andrew Yang has the intellectual curiosity to repair a lot of the like things he's saying, even knowing this backlash. But like, in case Andrew Yang is listening, you're fake, you're a lame, you're a sellout and a half and a silly son of a bitch. You'd be a terrible mayor of New York, and if you had a political conscience, you'd stop eyeing power and direct wealth better towards people who are better suited for actually having power, instead of wasting New Yorkers' time for your own opportunistic ends. Just stop it, go home. So I had my comments around that, but like, I think Andrew Yang's comments are kind of more typically what you would usually get, is that like, Israel has a right to defend itself. I want there to be peace more broadly, but like no acknowledgement of the actual power imbalance in the situation, and a lot of whitewashing of what Israel is doing as a essentially colonialist state. And Andrew Yang, within his own campaign, and of course externally on Twitter, he just got rolled. But internally within his own campaign, there are a lot of people who are like, this is an existential make or break moment for me, Andrew Yang, because I thought you were for like human rights and all these like things that, honestly, if you're gullible enough to work for Andrew Yang and believe those things, like whatever, that's your fault. But like, to believe he's anything more than just a soulless, blood-sucking business person who like is out for money and maybe selling some books, that's your fault. But Andrew Yang had come and force back and like pare back that statement. And so I don't think like Andrew Yang is running for mayor of New York. He's just like a major figure. He just happens to be easy for media attention because of these things. I pointed out more on the TDR if you want to watch that clip for that, Andrew Yang specifically. But I think there is a little bit of a sea change here within the same Republican talking points of Hamas is using children as like shields and all these other different things. They're not working. Alternative media, like we've mentioned before with Empire Files, is like starting to work better, and it's starting to get mentioned a lot more, and people are seeing it more. And I think that in addition to this political sort of leadership from a lot of progressives who are taking a really bold stance here, because being even seen and perceived as anti-Israel will have you bombarded from the right wing who is acting in bad faith. I'm not even going to mention those bad faith actors here because these are human lives that have been lost, and the game they play is absolutely fucking disgusting. But I think the fact that these politicians are able to stand and have a point to what they're saying, and they feel like they are being able to stand up for what they're doing, is also creating a positive feedback loop with regular people who are out in protests and demonstrations and are speaking out on these things. They're demanding that, at least from a policy perspective, as we get into Bam's favorite question, the United States begin to condition aid to Israel on a nonviolent strategy against the occupied territories. I guess that's like a starting question to like kind of continue things here. Like as we get to solutions moving towards like better resolutions toward these things, that was one step that I think is positive from the activist side of things, of conditioning support of Israel on more nonviolent steps. But like, what do y'all think of that, and where can it go forward? I'm especially curious of Bam's thoughts on this.
As I was looking something up. No, I'm just joking. This is gonna be I'm gonna try to not get too deep into this, but and this is probably, I don't know if it's controversial, but I don't. Maybe you'll disagree. I guess it'll make for some conversation. I don't really think that the way to it. I don't think that America has as much power in this situation as people think. Obviously, like the United States of America is like the world dominant power, But I think that this issue with the within Israel and the occupied territories, I think that the region itself has a lot more of a role to play than America. I'm aware that America gives a lot of money to Israel and things like that. I don't think that's necessarily going to stop. I don't think that actually needs to stop for the situation to be to start to be resolved. I can't pretend to know what resolved actually looks like, but for a process to begin to resolve the issue, we have the regional powers over there, Egypt, who has a peace treaty with Israel, which allows it to get the second most amount of foreign aid from America after Israel. That peace treaty was made in what, 82 or 72 or 83? 83?
In the 80s.
Whenever they killed Anwar Sadat after that. We got Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Iran by proxy, Hezbollah, and in a very minor way, Hamas. We just recently, and this is big news for me, just recently, I want to say 5 days ago or so, Iran and Saudi Arabia held talks in the UAE. What if Iran and Saudi Arabia having bilateral talks in the UAE in regards to things going on in that region? The reason why that's important, not just because they seem like these eternal enemies, which they're actually not. Don't let anybody tell you that, oh, it's because one's Shia, one's Sunni. That's actually racist. They used to be allies before the Iranian Revolution. Not only is it important because they are like at each other's throats politically currently, but because it doesn't include America. It doesn't include this big power. Hey, let's go. What's going on, man? Can we figure something out? They've already kind of done it in regards to Yemen. The UAE pulled out. They had they kind of like came together and to do something about Yemen. Not that it's perfect. I do think the regional powers in the Middle East have a lot more of a role to play when it comes to Israel. Israel had just recently, these past few years when Donald Trump was in power, went on their charm offensive. They had some kind of like, some level of a peace treaty with, or opening up diplomatic relations with Morocco, Bahrain. I want to say Qatar in regards to that too. Also Saudi Arabia. Netanyahu like went to Chad or something like that, or Sudan. I can't remember. He went to one of them countries. But I feel like what's happened is that these Arab nations haven't really seen much of a result from that. They're kind of realizing that we're being used as like, oh, look, see, Israel isn't that bad. Look, they have these relations with all these Arab countries. I really hope that's the case, that they're kind of seeing like, okay, you know what? Like that was cute when Trump was in office or whatever. We didn't really gain anything from that. So let's try to like come together and not necessarily not that they're doing it against Israel, but if these regional powers can get some level of like diplomatic, just being able to communicate with each other and not be like doing proxy wars with each other in Yemen and Syria and stuff, then we can see a lot of pressure to be being put on Israel to allow for water in Gaza and like allow this embargo to end. Turkey's also a major person. I totally forgot about Turkey. Turkey kind of goes back and forth. Erdogan's weird. Also, the
to
European
say the
Union.
least, that's the understatement of Power Report history. Erdogan's weird. Holy shit,
Dude is insane. But...
It's interesting because the Turkish military has like throughout for forever has always had good relations with the Israeli military. They used to do war games together and stuff like that. I don't really know what's going on nowadays with that. Erdogan has like positioned himself as a friend of the Palestinians, but it does go back and forth. That's complicated. But if these regions, and Turkey would have to be included in that, they can make it so Israel, even if Israel's getting $5 billion a year from America, they can make it so things have to be more livable for people in the occupied territories and also more livable for the Arab residents of Israel. It would take time. It ain't going to be perfect because I'm sorry, you're dealing with a population that is like rabidly racist against Arab people, rabidly. I can't say everybody, but a large part of the population, they've been radicalized, really radicalized against Arab people.
Not to jump into your point, Bam, but like it's just like to echo that. Like a lot of I'll finish counting out again, but there was an Empire Files clip that was making the rounds of Abby Martin interviewing a lot of Israeli men on the street, essentially, and they sound like MAGA troll heads. They sound like MAGA chuds. They're like, yeah, get them out of our country. They're terrible. They have to be.
I think Israelis have to take over, and they have to kick them away. It will be much better not to kill them, just to go back to Arab countries.
But it's really rightfully ours if you look at the history and at like the wars, and we didn't even start a lot of the wars, and we conquered these places rightfully, like it's ours.
I don't think there's any answer to it. Really? There's only one way. Like, I would carpet bomb them.
You would carpet bomb them?
It's the only way you could deal with it. Like, or try to stop them a different way. It never worked.
I'm not exaggerating when I'm using words like elimination, destruction, like get them out of here, move them away. Not even like find a place for them, just like out of sight, out of mind. And that is the force that the right wing in Israel has to play to. And that like, yeah, you're right. Unfortunately, there is like not much of a left wing in Israel to speak of outside of people who might hold like somewhat human rights positions within Israel, like regular people, but like they're shut out for religious reasons because of course you can imagine, again, without going into too much history, the culture behind the importance of a Jewish state for a lot of the people who live there as Jews. And that gets conflated with whiteness too often because there are Palestinian Jews as well. So like, continue.
I've got like 30 more seconds.
No. I'm sorry. I went on too long, Bam. You continue.
Oh no, this is going to be quick. Going back to exactly what you just said, when you understand Israel as an entity, you have to understand that, like, I'm just going to say it again, like it's a settler colonial project, and it is an apartheid state. Don't let that word apartheid just be like something to describe it with. A lot of the people in Israel have no idea about what's going on in Gaza and the West Bank. They have no clue. And they completely dehumanize those people over there. They're just like, it's miles away. It's a few miles away. And they live a completely different life. And a lot of the Israeli citizens could care less. It's like, oh, well, I don't know. The exact same way that it was in South Africa. You would have white residents, they live a few miles away from some shanty town. They don't even know what's going on. It's out of sight, out of mind. The population numbers in Israel are changing. I think the Israeli establishment is getting really nervous about that. The two-state solution is dead. Maybe there could be a one-state solution, a one-person, one-vote situation, and maybe that will be better. I don't know. A lot of those people in the Israeli political establishment are going to go down fighting, and hopefully it doesn't lead to more violence in a more intense way in the future. But these regional powers are going to have a lot to say about that, and I really hope that America is not involved in the way that it has been involved in past years.
America will be involved because it likes to stick its nose in business that they need to be in.
Yeah, that's true.
Should we move on to our boy Glenny?
No, I mean, I thought does anyone else have like any other points about like where, I mean, would anyone else like to solve Israel-Palestine here? It seems like only Bam has decided to take up the mantle.
Bam seems to have a good historical recollection of how to solve it. So I'm just gonna, we're gonna move on to my boy Big G.
I mean, no, seriously, the last point I have is that you raised a point, Bam, about like, can you, like the extent to which America has a say in all of this. And I think it's important to contextualize that no. I mean, like, you're right, Bam. Ultimately, America is just one actor, and although it sends a significant amount of money and has influence in the world stage anywhere, and just likes to like butt its head in everyone's, America's is Earth's micromanager, if you will, essentially. So like, yeah, America has its like influence in that sense, but as to Wed's decision, Netanyahu's been making decisions kind of regardless, just seeing that like America like will have its back, so to speak, right? Politically and whatever it's doing. If they see that, and you're not really getting this from the Biden administration, any kind of like speaking out against this is only happening pretty much within the Democratic House and through Bernie Sanders' statements being a senator. But the extent to which there is political pressure, where I think is a good thing, because that's where regular people can come in and start to build and apply that political pressure, and also through non-anti-Semitic efforts of protest, such as boycott, divestment, and sanctions. Being able to do those things and spearhead those things from a public relations standpoint, I think America has the podium and the stage to be able to do that. Like materially, like logistically, I think Bam's right. There's less that can be done, although definitely a start is to decrease the amount of funding that goes to Israel. You have to acknowledge that the U.S. did, like, whatever power it does have or doesn't have, during Donald Trump's administration, they exercised a lot of that power to give Israel, especially Israel's far-right government, a lot of like power. They gave them a lot of energy through their movement of the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem, through all these other different measures. The U.S. has influence, and it's not like the most concrete material benefit, but it is something that is definitely at play here and doesn't make or break anything. But I think how America wields its influence, and to its extent, how the American political system is pressured to wield its influence by its citizens, could be a large role to go for here.
Yeah. Also, the recognition of the Golan Heights for Israel, that was a big deal. I mean, it's not a big deal like probably for the American news consumer, but in the region, it was a big deal because Syria like always considers that territory occupied by Israel, and considers itself at a state of war with Israel because of part of its territory being occupied by Israel. And Donald Trump, I mean, it's just one. Obviously, it's a big, powerful entity saying that, no, that is Israel. The United Nations doesn't recognize it as a part of Israel. It does recognize it as occupied territory as well. But yeah, America does have a big influence. Like, you can't pretend that it doesn't. But maybe, and I'm probably also being hopeful, just that America won't, like, I feel like the big thing that America does for Israel is leave it alone. Just let the Israeli political establishment do whatever they want. And I just don't know how much America could force Israel to not do that. Like, could America get Israel to stop bombing? I don't know. Because I just know that money is always going to go there every year, no matter what.
Right,
so,
but I don't think that's the thing. Is like, I don't think I'm even proposing this. I'm saying if you make it conditional, if America makes their aid conditional, saying you can go ahead and continue like bombing whatever you're going to do, so to speak, but we're not going to give you aid anymore to whatever extent you benefit of that. And maybe Israel goes like, okay, sure, whatever. I continue going on.
Stockpile and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So like,
thing. They have from out, decades and decades and decades of funding and of acquiring all of this aid from the U.S. They have a stockpile. They have enough that they're not. It's too far gone. It's too far gone of a thing, in my opinion, to reel it back, where they have to do it within other forces. Unless the U.S. literally says we will put a blockade of ships or something, or does like some type of military intervention, really threatens and sanctions, actual sanctions like it does against Iran and other countries, then that's maybe the only way that they would actually stop something.
Right, it's the idea of the idea. Basically, the point that you and Bam are making is that economic soft power for America is no longer like a carrot that it can offer. It's no longer an incentive. It doesn't matter. It'll be thrown off the table, which I think is a fair point.
I just don't think so. I just think they're always going to get that money for sure. And if they want weapons, if America says we're not going to sell you weapons, they'll make their own, or they'll just get them from Russia. Putin don't have no damn morals. Russia will vote against stuff for Israel sometimes, but like, I know if Israel's like come with a few millions, they'll take it. But I just think it'll have to be like the regional powers coming together in a unified way, not to like give Israel necessarily ultimatums, but to like, you know, I don't know. Maybe I'm being naive, but just like, look, like this, what you're doing is just not working for you. Like it's not working. Like we have to do something different, and it will involve you humanizing these people in the occupied territories, and maybe it will involve making a one-state solution. And y'all just got to grow up, dude. Like, because this fighting back and forth is just not gonna make it. I don't want to see something like 1948 when Israel's getting invaded. I don't want to see more war, more dying. But I also don't want to see Israel killing people in Gaza and the West Bank and violating people's civil rights on a regular basis. So there's got to be something's got to happen to where people can coexist peacefully. And I don't think America's not going to do anything for that. Like nothing at all. It'll be people in the region that want peace and stability, that which they have had in the past in certain countries, to make that effect on Israel as well.
As coverage of the Israel-Palestine situation and the effect of the United States empire on the situation kind of reaches its fever pitch in America right now at the time of recording this, you have a lot of people who have spent a lot of their career making bones about reporting on this American empire, who are routinely shitting the bed at every opportunity they can to speak about these things, because the public mess they're making online helps them with views and helps them with subscriptions. They can continue to blog about their multi-million-dollar lives and how cancel culture is coming for them next. Of course, I'm talking about Glenn Greenwald, one of the most insufferable pricks in leftist online media, who decided to kind of, poke his head into the situation, because as I'll talk about in the coming months in a video I'm doing about grifting and all this stuff, it helps to jump into whatever conversation or controversy is of the day, have some wild off-base opinion just so people react to it, and the reaction itself becomes a story. Nevertheless, we'll bite. Here's Glenn Greenwald on Twitter saying, quote, "There's vastly more opposition in U.S. discourse to U.S. invasions of other countries than there is to Israeli invasions. I'll be surprised if more than a dozen members of Congress denounce the Israeli ground invasion of Gaza. It's utter lockstep consensus about this foreign country." Now, Glenn Greenwald is speaking at this time when at time of recording, we don't know if this will evolve into a full-on ground invasion, but this is Glenn Greenwald speaking when talks of a ground invasion, at least to some extent, are kind of brewing and ongoing, right? But this idea that there's more opposition in U.S. discourse to U.S. invasions of other countries as opposed to Israel. Yeah, I'll take that in another period of time. But as we talked about, Bam, you're kind of shaking your head. What do you got for that right there, just to begin with?
I'm just shaking my head at Glenn Greenwald. Don't just ignore me. I'm just mad at him already.
I told you, bro, it's hard, right? But the thing I'm getting at is that yeah, maybe in earlier times you could have made the argument that people get more upset about other things, but with Israel, for a number of different reasons, there's sort of this sense of we give unequivocal support to whatever this right-wing government of this particular country is doing. But now, as I've kind of alluded to earlier, all of the politicians he clout chases about are the ones who are speaking out the most forefront about this issue. So again, Glenn Greenwald has eggs on his face. He's doing this whole again, continued spiel with himself. He continued on saying, "There are few humanitarian tragedies on this planet that compare with the lives of Gazans, 2 million human beings, overwhelmingly trapped in an open-air prison. And now one of the world's powerful militaries is invading yet again from air to land." And he's just saying it's U.S. money, technology, diplomacy, and weapons that enable it. He's making his own sort of speech about it there, but he is kind of trying to make this whole thing he is the defender of the left. He's the one who's this major person of the movement. He's the one true Scotsman in all of this who actually cares about U.S. foreign intervention. Meanwhile, what is he doing in the United States, and our closest parallel to this, when you have the citizens who follow a right-wing government to the point of LARPing and fanaticism, terrorizing people of color who want to actively create a situation in this country where they're marginalized and degenerized even further. I'm of course talking about Glenn Greenwald's reaction to The Intercept's reporting on people who are media viewers for the Proud Boys and try to cover things and spin things like Project Veritas, so it makes it look like the Proud Boys are in the right and Antifa protesters, etc., are in the wrong. Glenn Greenwald comes out saying that journalists have been repeatedly assaulted while covering Antifa protests. Antifa threatens journalists, breaks their cameras, and attacks them violently. The Intercept shows this. They're showing two journalists they should look out for. This is what this is for, which got the attention of friend of the show, Andy No, who thanked Glenn for reaching out, saying it's been disturbing to see journalists in recent years celebrate, enable, or even aid others in the assault of harassment of journalists whose views they disagree with. Andy No, who recently tweeted that he nearly suffered a traumatic head injury and nearly was brought to the brink of his life because someone tossed a milkshake at his ugly face. And he continues to turn that into his big 9/11 moment. But like, it was his personal 9/11. I'll get a little bit more into Glenn Greenwald in just a moment, because like there's more smoke to be had here about how much of a goddamn fraud he is and how much of a grifter he's become to enable the right wing in the United States and in the world, especially when it's right in front of his face. But who else wants to jump in here on Glenn Greenwald's complete bullshittery?
My submit milkshake brings all the boys to the yard.
God.
That's all I got.
Oh.
Pulitzer Prize winning.
It's really
Glenn.
funny. Like Glenn Greenwald is just the epitome of just like a flake, like a snowflake, just flip flopping because, you know, he spent that time. And once again, we've gone over this. I gained so much respect from him at that time when he did the Lula interview, was in Brazil, you know, spent time there. And then it's really funny how you can literally sit and see things happen unfold before you. Expose Operation Car Wash and be a part of that big movement. And then what happens to when you watch this occur and you completely flip? It doesn't register to me. It only registers to me that the fact that you're a clown. You're a clown. You it's like it's the fact that when he was, one of his quotes is like, oh well, you know, deciding to attack progressives on this, what's going on with the issue, like exposing like who AOC knows and hangs out with. Like literally, what does that actually have to do with anything, my guy? Like we just talked about how many people died. Buildings are exploding. This is your powerful point. This is your well, you know, check your own house issue. That's the one. That's the approach you want to take. And we know we even talked about how Benny Gantz's comment is going on. Like it's what like the there's no intersecting lines in this. It's only further reinforcing that it's becoming annoying to me that he has any sort of platform. I hate the fact that when I see his name somewhere, like I don't even want his name anywhere. You know what? Like I'm not out here advocating for deep platforming. No, whatever. Just I wish I might have to give him the Trump treatment I did, was just mute anything with his name in it, because I can't take it, honestly. Like he has too much of a voice and he keeps taking stances that are inconsistent with his entire journalistic history. And that's the worst part about it. You've lost your credibility as a journalist to me if your stances are completely bipolar, okay? And so don't come around now. Don't come around to being the quote unquote, no, you're none of that. You're just whack. That's what you are. I'm out here.
It is just like a complete like disgrace. Like Glenn Greenwald, to even show you how annoyed people are with him at this point. There was Micah Flea, I believe, who was from The Intercept, who was director of info security Intercept, who was kind of like basically getting into a Twitter war with Matt Taibbi, kind of. Well, like, yeah, this whole kind of came out about this whole story about The Intercept's covering of these Proud Boys pretending to be media, but like acting as these smear merchants for the Proud Boys, essentially. And Matt Taibbi did an article saying The Intercept used to challenge the spy state, and now they're a part of it, saying that challenging challenging Alex Jones or anything else like this, these right wingers, is like challenging the spy state, is kind of ridiculous to say. Also from Matt Taibbi, whose like takes have gotten worse and worse over the years. But Micah Flea is also like pointing out about how like this point is misleading. But Glenn Greenwald tweets that The Intercept took this person, referring to Micah, saying that it took him to do computer work and then slapped journalists on his name. He's the person who, like the FBI and NSA, is digging through personal data of ordinary Gab users to dox them. And then says, read this exchange with a real journalist asking him about it, referring to the real journalist being Matt Taibbi. So Micah says, it's much to your point, Caesar. Glenn's only real journalism since Snowden was the Lava Jato Brazil corruption stories, which I helped make possible for him. Everything else has been supporting the American fascist movement dressed up as, quote, media criticism. Let me see what was the other thing he said, because it was also really good. It was the technical Snowden reporting that I'm most proud of. The series on X-Keyscore has Glenn's name attached to it, but he actually didn't do any work on it. So one of the things where like Glenn Greenwald supposedly mapped out like NSA's connections to all these different points in the world, so how they get in data even across the world borders. Yeah, that was Micah's role that Glenn Greenwald just kind of took credit for, to talk about who's the real journalist or not from this fucking bozo.
It's really funny. Like he became like a little clout goblin, right? Like it's all good when he had the Lula interview. I mean, it was put together beautifully. And now, I mean, at the time I'm following this, I'm learning new things. And of course, I didn't know. We just see the face behind it, right? That's Glenn. Glenn actually gets to see Lula in prison, or at the court office where he got to actually talk to him, asked him, I thought, very fair questions, very middle questions, right? Not just totally in support, but letting Lula speak. It was very well done. And then the articles and the whole Lava Jato situation, that was great. And then, you know, the Snowden one was pretty good as well, but we don't know how much work is put in. I'm glad that he was able to speak out to let us know the truth, because it only became, I started getting a really weird feeling about Glenn when he posted like on Twitter, while he was in Brazil, some like work he was doing with like impoverished Brazilians. And I remember I was like reading it and I was like getting like, so I was like, what's I don't know. Like I can't remember exactly why, but I was like, I don't know, something's off about this. And then it started getting really weird after that. And of course we covered extensively here at the tipping point for everything. But yeah, Glenn Greenwald, it's of course like the way he would, as a clout goblin that he is, call out someone for journalistic integrity, and like you're the last guy on earth to ever be allowed to do this, let alone it's annoying when a journalist can do that to somebody else, but you're like last on the list, my guy. I'm sorry, you're last here.
There's something else about Glenn that bothers me. I don't know if this is
whoa, Bam. Well, what is it?
I don't know. I don't know if this is valid or not, but like
a
part of me is like, dog, like you're not even here, dude. Like you're not even in the trenches with us, dude. Like you're out in Brazil somewhere hiding in some compound. Like we're here, dude. Like we're here in the trenches. Like nobody can see you. Like we don't know what you're doing out there.
Yeah.
Actually, I almost said something crazy. Let me relax. But it's just like, dude, you got too much to say for somebody who's not even here in the trenches, dude. Like, you don't really know what's going on here. Like, Glenn's been in Brazil for forever. Like, he doesn't know, like, how tense it was when the Muslim ban protests were going on at them airports. And we seen them soldiers with them big-ass guns and then people protesting. We know if one shot goes off, it's going to get crazy. He wasn't here when them people stormed the Capitol and like we're all watching it on the news and don't know what's going to happen. Like he doesn't feel like what we feel here in America these past years when Trump was in office. It's easy for you to comment on stuff and just be like, well, you're not treating this person fairly. And you don't, why are you guys being so mean to the problem? Antifa, somebody like, no, dude, nobody's scared when the Antifa dudes roll up to the protests. Like we're not scared of them. Nobody's afraid of, like, we got to watch out for them Hawaiian shirt dudes. We got to watch out for the dude who shot that guy in Oakland, who shot that federal officer in Oakland, who was some boogaloo boy. We got to watch out for them. Glenn Greenwald, like, dude, you're over there. Like, just talk about Brazil politics. But it's just weird. It's like, dog, like, I don't, like I said, I don't know if it's valid, but it just seems very weak to me that you got so much to say. Come out here and talk about it.
So
that's a very fair. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I mean, like, there's a point I agree with that, and there's a point I disagree with that on. Because, like, the point I agree with is that, like, Glenn Greenwald was reporting mostly for The Intercept, just Brazil-related things for a while, essentially, and then Glenn Greenwald decided that there was a lot more money and attention to be made off of this right-wing grifting, and Substack would give him an extra contract signing bonus for it. So he decided to do that, and he pivoted his coverage towards covering more of like those kinds of stories. So like that's kind of what led to Glenn Greenwald's sort of like editorial decision-making. Now the band's point about like America, you got to be here in order to like report on it properly. Like, yeah, maybe there's something to that, but I'll actually go to something that's maybe like a little bit bigger than that. I think there is a metaphorical and physical ivory tower that Glenn Greenwald is in. That's the same metaphorical and physical ivory tower that folks like Jimmy Dore sits in. Because the thing that separates me from a person like Jimmy Dore is there's no way in hell that I could possibly say as a person of color, as someone who like has all these other identities, that a Trump administration might turn out better for me or might turn out better for progressives. Like there's no way I can say that about other people. To be able to say that, oh, maybe things won't be so bad under Trump. Hey, we had 4 years of Trump and guess what? Nothing really changed. To say that shows a fundamental disconnection between what really happened to people of color, what really happened to LGBTQ folks, what really happened to the working class as Donald Trump's like base was energized by his like daily like bouts of hatred. It's something that you can only say if you don't talk to regular people or you only talk to regular people who worship you and idolize you on the internet. Clout chasing goblin is actually a little too nice. Like if clout were a bunch of dicks, Glenn Greenwald and Jimmy Dore would be gobbling that shit here to Sunday, right? Like it is literally unbelievable in the sense that there is not a story or a controversy or anything to be said where Jimmy Dore and Glenn Greenwald will not immediately jump up to it just to look for some clout. They literally, this like clout dick's about to come into dust. There's like no fucking shit else you can do. Like, there's nowhere else they can go, honestly, but like they will continue to go lower because that's where the clicks are.
I thought Clout Goblin was fun, but then Clout Dick is a new one. Is that what they doing out there in South Brazil where he's hiding, or what?
Twitter is a bag of clout dicks, and they're just going for every single one. Let's just leave it there.
And honestly, what you're saying is true, because if you look at Greenwald's Twitter, which I had to unmute to go look at, this dude, he's like referencing Intercept articles about Brazil like in March of this year. I'm like, what are you doing? I thought you're honestly, now you should be against Lula, honestly, like just to keep it real. What are you doing here? Either you stick to, like Bam said, it was all good until he started venturing out. Should stick to Brazil politics when he started seeing that bag from messing around with the right wing stuff here, tweeting out of no IPs in Brazil, some VPN he gets to mess around with down there. It's all good until like you start realizing that you had articles and people start following you based upon a stance that I was aligned with when you were talking about Brazil politics. But, you know, a lot of those Brazil politics, you're spreading that message to America. And in America, to be fair, it's like I'm on the other side of that. So it's like I'm not in accordance with what he does. And it's like it gets so annoying. It's hard for me to like write it in sentences. Like I just want to say things I'm not allowed to on here. That's why I don't even like talking about Glenn Greenwald's whack ass.
It's just like, I mean, really what it boils down to is like, you want to believe someone has principles. Mm-hmm. And we've just realized over this amount of time that Glenn Greenwald has no principles. And it's been hard for me, honestly, like with Glenn and with other people that have not looked at their Twitters for months. It was hard for me as somebody like on the left and somebody who's like anti-war and stuff like that, to realize like some of these people have no principles. And I don't know if we did it on the show, Dan, before, but I know like I felt like I was almost like pleading to you, like, Dan, like, what's up with these people, dude? Like, what's going on, man? You're in there. What is going on? Because
that was an earlier PowerPoint episode. Folks can check that out. I don't remember the episode, but just listen to all of them. So I'll work.
Yeah, like, because I was like, man, like I remember like, 2014 and stuff, like you guys had principles, but like Trump came along and I just feel like they really saw that there is a lot of money to be made by like either toying with those right-wing people or just going headfirst in there. And a lot of them did it. And then it goes back to like the reasons why we started Power Report is like, you start to look at the makeup of a lot of those people and it is pretty homogenous over there. Like you're like, damn, okay, well, maybe it isn't that crazy because on the low, it's a bunch of white dudes.
And Bam got to go crazy earlier. So just one more point, and the only reason I even care about this is because, look where we are now. 2019, the article came out about everything that happened, the atrocities, the rigged Supreme Court justice, the entire setup just being basically to get Lula in prison, deem him ineligible to become president, even though he had majority vote, and then come with Bolsonaro, who now is currently president of Brazil, already working on seeing if he can get the next term going, right? And what happened during that time period of 2019? Coronavirus hit. Brazil's economy tanking. The amount, the reais converted to dollar amount exploding. How bad it is right now, Brazilian currency. Sorry, all of that has happened. One can only think of now Brazil being one of the most impacted countries due to COVID. Terrible death rates related to this. I'm only imagining if Lula was president, that's how the situation could be different. How him relying on trying to assess the vaccine, roll out vaccines earlier. So many things could have been so much different. So in a way, his article was important because it was shedding light on what could have been and what could have been in terms of saving literally lives in a country. But to come around and be the grifter and the clown and flipping on this, that's what's the wackest to me. Because I'm like, we're kind of playing with people's lives when you're reporting with this stuff. And now look where you are. Like now you're on the other side and there's people in Brazil dying every day. Like it's just the lowest low to me, honestly.
I think those are excellent points that Glenn Greenwald should bring up in his interview with Jair Bolsonaro. That'll be like a landmark thing where it'll be like, sir, I love your work. You've done excellent things, Mr. Bolsonaro, sir.
I'll fly down there and start throwing hands if I see handshakes between them two.
Breaking news, you heard it here first.
With Jair Bolsonaro says so many homophobic things, so I wonder if he would even do that.
Then I'll be like,
maybe he'd be like, maybe I'll turn into alligator if I touch his hand or something. You never know; he might say something wild like that.
Like no lie, it would be the worst of all time in terms of just his moral concept of being a human being to be all good. High-fiving Bolsonaro. Like he can never speak again. Like not only is that man against your whole project that got you some clout dick, whatever Dan talked about, but also like that man has said terribly homophobic things, talking about how, running over his child if he was gay and things that were really, really terrible that align with his alleged principles if he has any left. So if that was the situation, I'd be like, you should just honestly just get off internet and just try to figure yourself out as a person. That's what you need to do.
And with that, having pissed off more Glenn Greenwald and Jimmy Dore fans on the internet, I think that's time to end this episode. Power Report, thank you for, I'll plug Power Report more broadly. Power Report can be found on Twitter at Power Report WRLD. That's Power Report WRLD. You can check out all of our links and things like that. Powerreport.world on Instagram is also where you can find us. I'll try to get more clips up on Instagram as well. It's just, I do too many things. I got to figure this out.
Oh, good dog.
And yeah, I'll go into Audio Face. Got really exciting stuff coming up in the Audio Face side of things. I'll also Power Report side, we just did an interview with Emma Vigeland on the previous episode where we talk about a lot of these things, including Bam's topic, which is actually something I want to explore with a few more guests and a few other episodes about like what happened to the left, what happened to like the beginning mainstream like online left space, and like where is that continuing to go and where does that go from here? Emma and I talked a lot about that, and including our like shitty governors in California, New York. So definitely make sure you check out that episode as well. And as I was saying on Audio Face, we're going to have our usual music reviews episodes and a special Radiohead bonus, which will be coming up very soon. So make sure you check that out at audioface.show or youtube.com/audiofacepod for those links. Bam and Ceez, what y'all got?
Well, I just want to say, as someone, Dan accused me of not saying I shouldn't notice things in the background. please go watch Power Report on YouTube so you can see Sean laying down at some point.
I had to grab
Yeah,
something.
just please go watch on YouTube so you can
Beautiful.
see Sean laying on his bed at some point. And yeah, you can find us at WeMadeItPodcast.com.
Sean was literally down bad at that moment. He was thinking about how he already lost Glenn. Now he's losing Yang Gang. So it's kind of getting rough out here for him. That's why he's like, damn, Yang Gang was my last hope. But even during AAPI, Yang Gang decided to flip flop on his own people. But it's all good, though.
Tom Steyer, take the wheel. I know Sean really loves Tom Steyer. Was his third in the Democratic primary.
Steyer. I have no idea how to say his name.
Yeah, that'll
canceled.
That'll be great. Caesar, you got a stream, right?
Yes, I do have a stream. Check me out on Twitch. We Made It Ceez. I'm there three times a week, 7 to 9 p.m. Monday, Wednesday, Friday Pacific time, and also on YouTube. We Made It Ceez. Yeah, check it out.
Right on. Folks, we'll be back with another Power Report. You've gotten, we could argue more Power Report than you deserve because you've just done like 3 episodes of Weeks in a Row, but I could say less Power Report than you deserve because I owe those episodes from the times that I skipped. But anyways, this has been great, and thank you for listening and downloading Power Report, and we'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode, as you deserve. Bye. All right, 10 seconds.
Sean's not here.
Now he's pegging the cat.
I'm pertaining to my cat.
Plus, that's why I start on the one shot to make sure like I'm clean, and then I could do that. So then we run to those things. And I have the 3 as a backup in case Bam takes a potty break. So
Forehead cam.
Forehead cam.
Forehead cam is camera 7. Okay.